And we are live. So welcome everyone to Think Young's Hidden Inventors. How can the EU promote inventiveness in youth? This is a webinar organized in partnership with Ericsson, who is kindly supporting us since 3 years now in revealing which are the European hidden inventors of the past, of the present, and trying to motivate and have more inventors in the future. In a world filled with crucial challenges, research and innovation are key to building a more resilient and sustainable society. As the home of countless inventors, we really look back at hundreds of years ago when Europe was leading the inventor scene and still is. Europe must continue its strong heritage of inventiveness. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's ambitious agenda requires a policy approach that incentivize, present, and future inventors, allowing them to flourish and prosper. That's why we started this campaign 3 years ago, the Hidden Inventors campaign, together with Ericsson. And we, as part of this campaign, if you live in Brussels this week, you probably have seen several billboards around town. We have visited school. We've been talking to over 700 teenagers across Europe, explaining the importance of becoming an inventor. And today, we're very lucky and honored to have two special guests joining us in this conversation on how to safeguard Europe's future as a true beacon of innovation. Tsvetelina Penkova, member of the European Parliament. Thank you, Tsvetelina, for joining us. Hi. And Magnus Frodigh, Vice President and Head of Ericsson Research. Hi, Magnus.
Yes, hello.
Welcome. As I said, we at Think Young, together with Ericsson, we have done in the last 6 months a research exercise, and the research is published and live up on our website today. So you can find it if you go on thinkyoung.eu/hidden inventors. The title of the research, How Divergent Thinking Can Foster Inventiveness in Europe. There are a few key findings that I'm gonna show today here with you guys, just to create a bit of expectation, and then you can go online, click on this website, download the full report. So we'll start with this key findings, and then we open the conversation with Tsvetelina and Magnus. First finding, young Europeans are unable to gauge their creativity level. There is a low correlation between self-reported creativity score and actual creativity score obtained through the divergent thinking test. What does this mean? Is that the one who performed the best are really not good at saying or understanding that they performed the best. And this is something that probably has to do with self-confidence. And we have to make sure that young Europeans understand how important it is that creativity and divergent thinking is definitely one of the key skills required by present and future jobs. So we have to make sure that young Europeans have a bit of a better understanding and self-confidence in themselves. The second one, let me take a second to show it up. There is no difference between young European males and females regarding creativity. No different whatsoever. We measure among different countries, different age group. The distribution of shape at no difference, with similar proportion also on the high scores in both groups. Why do we mention the high scores? Is because, as you know, creativity, there are some people who are extremely creative and, you know, the outliers, the one who really perform super well. And also in this one, both male and female perform exactly the same. The third one, quite interesting, links to the first one. The one with a high elevated level of creativity underestimate themselves. So not only people are kind of not good at really assessing where they fit in this grade, but especially the one who really do well, they don't know it. Probably because it's not one of the things that is tested at school or measured in the formal education system, but definitely the self-assessment of the best one is let's say, more humble than probably that it should be. The fourth one, even though the bulk of respondents in each country perform very similarly, we do have some better performing countries, and we know this is something that sometimes interests people, and definitely Poland, Sweden, Germany, and Belgium are the ones scoring best, and then we have France and Italy, which are a bit behind. We don't know the reason of this. It was not part of a research exercise, but it might be one potential second edition of the research find out what is actually different in certain countries compared to other one. If you're familiar with European topics and the whole agenda on education, you know that certain countries like Sweden, like Poland, do very well in STEM skills, which are really important for education, and new skills, but this is something that was not part of a research exercise. The last few finding, there was no significant relationship between educational level and creativity when controlling for gender, for age, and for country of residence. This is something that probably has to do with informal education. And we had several inventors that we hosted in previous webinars who were actually, yes, praising the education system somehow, but also saying that a lot of their creativity, a lot of their invention came out of experience they've done in what is called informal education. So still education, but outside of the classic, primary, secondary school. And this is probably something, again, that we need to check. These are all the main findings we had for the research. There is way more. It's a quite extensive paper, and I'm very thankful both for the Think Young and Ericsson team who managed to put this together. As I said before, the research, the full report is up on our website as of today, thinkyoung.eu/HiddenInventors. But now we go to the interesting part of the conversation today, meaning the chat with Tsvetelina and Magnus. And we start from an opening question for Tsvetelina on young people, because obviously as Think Young, this is what we look at. And as the European Commission also announced, it's European Year of Youth. So it's quite an important year for young people in Europe. And young people today will be key to finding innovative solutions to fundamental challenges such as climate change, which is one of the priorities of the European Commission. And empowering the next generation is vital to building a stronger future. So Tsvetelina, how can we foster the next generation of European inventors?
Thanks, Andrea, for the question. I think I will just start with reaffirming the fact that it's more or less underlined in your question, the fact that young people are the driving force of any technological or innovative creation in the world. And even if there were doubts on that, I think the COVID pandemic that just hit us in the last 18 months has a very strong example that without the quick response and the adaptiveness of some of the developments that we've seen on the technological side that were led by young people, we wouldn't have been able to perform our work, our education, or like any other interaction among us. So thinking about that and like listening to actually the findings you've just shared with us, there was one interesting point that you brought up. I think it was the third one, the fact that people with a very high elevated level of creativity underestimate themselves simply because it cannot be measured. This kind of brings me to the way of thinking of how the education system is more or less structured across the EU. And probably if we look into that in details, we're going to see why some of the countries you've mentioned have higher scoring performers compared to others. So my point here is that we should be focusing and trying to promote more interesting and practical education, where except of the theoretical part, you actually show to people how their value-added creativity or their ideas can be implemented in practice. This is typical usually for the Anglo-Saxon education system, where practice and theory are more or less 50-50% of share, which is not the case with the continental education system. Second point, which I would make here in terms of how to foster the development of young entrepreneurs, is to grant them, to give them, and to provide them opportunity to have early access to companies where they can first improve their skills and further develop them. This again goes hand in hand with the university education, for instance, because boosting universities to work together with companies to see what are the needs of the company so they can adapt some of their curriculum, for instance, would be quite helpful, because in that way you are literally immediately creating the professionals that the industry need by promoting some of those skills or some of the knowledge that is needed. So my general recommendation, I've spoken for a bit longer, is to have a more close and cohesive relationship between the education, especially at university level in Europe, and the business and the industry sector, especially on the tech and innovation side.
Thank you, Tsvetelina. And that gives me a very nice hook to move on to Magnus, because clearly when you talk about cooperation between universities and companies and more practical experience from young people when they study, I think that's definitely what companies are looking at, and especially the most ahead of the curve company like Ericsson. So Magnus, what are your thoughts at large on why it's important and how can we foster the next generation of European inventors, but also what role, linking to what Tsvetelina was saying, what role is there for companies like Ericsson to support this goal?
Yeah, let's start with the role of Ericsson there. I think perhaps there is a belief that there is only sort of startups and new smaller companies that are sort of super inventive, right, etc. But that's not really the case. The big companies like Ericsson, we are really at heart a company of inventors. Of course, it is here we really have the hidden inventors, because there's a lot of people that are solving new problems on a daily basis and are inventing solutions, right? And if you were to look at the Ericsson research department, I mean, we have been behind the 2G system, the 3G, the 4G, and now the 5G systems, right? And these are truly huge innovations in itself, right? But they are also, of course, an innovation platform. So the fact that we will have these systems deployed will then facilitate a lot of innovations on top. And here I agree with Tsvetelina here that it is really the combination of education and more practical work that really could stimulate. So of course the education is extremely important here, and including then education and skills in sort of these digital skills when it comes to AI, security, communication, etc., compute. All of that would of course be key. But it's also then the possibility to try and develop things and start to solve problems and inventing things. I think that is the ones that will really sort of inspire and get the new inventors to really get going. So it is really this combination, the education and the practical. And then I think a lot of people will discover that they actually are entrepreneurs and want to work with this. So I think that's one thing. And also from own experiences then, when we are working with these research topics, we are really trying to mix more experienced and the more newly graduate persons coming into the research department, and the mix of experience and new thinking and different perspectives, backgrounds, gender, everything of that gives a lot of value, I think. So there's a lot of things we can work with here, I think.
Great, thank you. And you mentioned somehow that there are a lot of hidden inventors within companies such as Ericsson, and you mentioned 5G, and definitely we are seeing this rapid deployment of advanced technology. There is 5G, there is artificial intelligence, quantum computing, energy, nanotech. There is literally, every week there's new things coming, and definitely there are more other innovations that also have the power to advance economies, solve key societal issues. So, very much of the interest also of policymaker. And in this one, Tsvetelina, how can the EU increase its influence in this area, to ensure that to connect breakthrough research like the one that Magnus was mentioning and new technologies to the market potentially, to achieve disruptive innovation? Or what would be the role of programs such as Horizon Europe or any other program that the EU has to make sure that we still are there when it comes to very forward-thinking technology and impactful technology.
So, Andrea, in terms of the regulation, you're completely right, especially when we're speaking about 5G and artificial intelligence. The regulator in the EU, we're trying to put down some guidelines, some rules that would help at the same time boost the technological development without harming it with over-regulation. At the same time, we're trying to protect our consumers, society, because there are some aspects which I'm just gonna flag and mention in the next few minutes. But we are completely clear that Europe at the moment, we have the potential to become probably a global leader in the digital space and to gain competitiveness in that. First of all, because we're the only political entity at the moment, like political and economic entity, that's starting to set the proper rules on that matter. But to achieve that, of course, we should be taking many factors into account. We are all clear with the benefits, for instance, of artificial intelligence. On one side, one of the main goals of EU is achieving the objectives of the Green Deal. Everyone more or less is familiar with that. We've been speaking quite a lot. So the last data shows that artificial intelligence could actually help us reduce the greenhouse emissions between 1% and 4% by 2030. So in that case, the technology is actually practically applicable to achieve long-term goals and policies which every European citizen support, more or less. Another thing which AI could bring to us is like increased productivity by almost 20% and adding about 2.5 trillion euros to the EU economy also by 2030 if we implement that technology correctly. So having all that data, of course, we do acknowledge the importance to stimulate those programs, to stimulate the technological advancement, to stimulate young people understanding how they work, and to make sure that they are applied in businesses, especially in small and medium enterprises, which would be the driving force, and they've always been the driving force of the European economy. But we should also take into account when we're speaking about those technologies, there are a few aspects which we need to look at that might sometimes be criticized by certain companies. For instance, on AI, we're speaking about ethical, social, and economic aspect. I'm not gonna go into details, but you understand even by the labels what concerns we might be taking into account. The social impact of implementing such technology out of a sudden is quite massive when we're speaking, for instance, at the employment level, which also is something that has been impacted quite a lot by the current crisis. So we need to be implementing those technologies as a pace that allows the society to adapt to it and allows our employees and workers to continuously learn how to use those technologies to support their job and to make it of a better quality rather than substituting them. So in terms of that, I think programs like Horizon Europe you've mentioned is playing a very key role when it comes to supporting European researchers and connecting them in order to make sure that we achieve that proper symbiosis between the social needs and the company's needs without one being at the expense of the other, at the same time ensuring that we are going to gain competitive advantage with the proper technological development. So those three factors should all go together, and sometimes it's difficult to balance them out.
Oh no, yes. I mean, we say it often. There's definitely difficult times for policymakers. It's extremely challenging, and it's not easy to keep pace with everything that's happening. It's really, I think, something that people should acknowledge, that being a policymaker in 2022 is not the same as 20, 30 years ago. Definitely. And you did mention several policy frameworks, which are definitely quite important and interesting. And on this one, Magnus, I mean, you're the head of research at Ericsson, also a large player and definitely a top position where you can have an impact, on a daily basis. You heavily relies on constant innovation. As you said, you have a lot of inventors in-house. And how important do you think is a policy framework for a company like yours? Where can government be most effective? Where would you, if for one day, instead of being maybe head of research, you would be head of a government or some division in the European Commission or Parliament, what would you think, where would be your role in supporting, encouraging inventors, innovation, all this?
Yeah. I think a lot of, not only, but a lot of innovations that we do foresee coming in the future are in this digitalization space. So it will be a lot around of things being connected. You are able to get a lot of data out of it. You need to think about the cybersecurity aspects, etc. So there is a lot of things here. And I think, first of all, in order to start with creating the possibility and the platform for this innovation, we do need a very strong built-out infrastructure. So it's extremely important that all cities, all parts of Europe have a very good 5G coverage. And of course, now coming from Ericsson, I realize that I'm promoting our own technology here, but it is a key thing in order to foster this innovation on top of that. So everybody have the possibility to explore and try things. Because looking at what happened on 4G, there were now big companies, right? You can think about the Swedish Spotify, which is based on the fact that we all have a smartphone. But it's of course also Netflix and all the American companies, etc. Right? And now when we are introducing 5G, we will open up this innovation platform for so many more sectors. So each and every sector, everything from transportation to agriculture to smart cities to education, entertainment, everything will be transformed by this technology. So to be in the lead here, it's extremely important to have this infrastructure available. And it's not only the connectivity, it's of course also to have the compute capabilities and having data available. And here data is sensitive, there's a privacy concerns, there's a lot of regulation needed. But if we can do this right, I think we can create this advantage for Europe, that we have a controlled way of sharing data, which opens up for a lot of innovation. And the ones that has the data, the compute, and the innovators, you will see really this exponential development. So I think there's a lot of things to do here to provide the right infrastructure. Then I think the applications then supported by the 5G platform, of course, we will go from today's smartphones, go over to augmented reality and more Internet of Senses, where we are sort of experiencing things in a new way. And that will open up possibilities for education, entertainment, and healthcare, etc. So it also has a component that will be a key need for Europe in order just to be able to meet all our targets. And this, of course, includes the efficiency and productivity gains that we can see by connecting things also from a CO2 emissions perspective. And then, of course, it's important to avoid these rebound effects. If you do something more efficient, it could be tempting to do more of that instead, right? Instead of taking advantage of the savings on the CO2 side. So it's important to have the right regulations in place. So the savings or the improvements in productivity really comes out as a saving in the CO2 emissions. So that's an important aspect. So I think there is definitely a need for this guardrails from a regulator in order to make sure that we are moving towards these targets and use these technologies, possibilities in the right way. So I think this is as you said, Andrea, this is a difficult task, and you want to have these regulations, but you will still want to allow all the innovation because we need both.
Thank you. If I can follow up on this to you, Magnus, because you mentioned infrastructure. When you mentioned, the application you can do on this infrastructure. You mentioned Spotify. You mentioned Netflix. A lot of success stories. And if we look back at the last 3 years, now we do these webinars, and sometimes it's policymakers, sometimes it's big companies. Most of the time, it's with inventors. There is a constant refrain from inventors, when they talk about it's important for us that the whole patent, framework is correct, because whether I'm a small startup and I develop something, so I spend time on it, or I'm a big company and one of my inventors develops something, then once that framework is fair, then it's easier to share. You can share with other companies, and we know how important is this, conversation also between companies on fair terms, no? And then you have a virtuous circle of innovation, etc. However, IP is a topic that is often debated, not just in Brussels. I think any policymaker that looks at innovation at a certain point then falls onto IP. What can you think, if we look at this specific one, EU and its member state can do to create a more favorable environment for inventiveness, in the area of IP rights, so that we can really look at inventors, whether they're in big companies or in startup, that's it doesn't matter for now, but it really, when they create something and then they patent and they can become, from inventors, then become entrepreneurs, which is what Tsvetelina was saying before. That's how you create jobs, not just when you have an invention, but then when you make sure that it connects with our company's infrastructure and it grows.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I think we have a good starting point. I think Europe have had a strong IPR protection for long, and we need to make sure that we are keeping that, of course, and continue to be strong. And big companies, including Ericsson, investing a huge amount of money then in R&D. And for Ericsson, for example, we are investing 3.5 billion euros every year. We have 21 research and development centers in Europe, 15,000 engineers or something working for us in Europe. So and in order to be able to do that, and at the same time, we would like to collaborate with the ecosystem, then we need to know that we can share our findings without sort of other ones taking unfair advantage of this. So then we need to be able to protect them. So the possibility to protect something for us is also opening a door for a collaboration opportunity with others, because then we know what we have, we know what they have, and then we can invent new things on top of that, and then it moves on, right? And of course, for a smaller company, in order to be able to interact with others, it's the same thing. Then it's even more sensitive, I think, for them to be able to protect their original idea, so to say, and their technology that they have invested in. Then you can go to market in different ways. Of course, you can do as Ericsson, make products and services that we are then selling to customers. But you can also license technology, right? If you have it IPR protected, you could also license the technology to others that are then making the products and services out of that. And then you get a return on your investment anyhow, right? Just by the protection of your original work. So it is a key thing. And I think it really have positive, I think it's more positive to facilitate collaboration if you're able to get this basic protection. So we are working a lot with IPRs. It's a key thing in our industry, and it really facilitates all the standardization work and everything we do. I mean, you could take a smartphone now and you can use that all over the globe, right? And you can communicate with your services independent if the network is delivered by Ericsson or Nokia. You can use the compute from one of the hyperscalers, etc. So everything works together, right? And that's due to the fact that we have been able to agree on this common standards. And behind that, there is a lot of IPR in order to be able to do that.
Thank you. That was extremely comprehensive. Tsvetelina, intellectual property is clearly a super powerful tool for the EU to thrive in a highly competitive environment. What can you do to ensure a strong IP framework, but also to raise awareness, no, when it comes to IP rights, especially to young people? It seems like that's, at least from our feeling when we look at these things, I definitely will have to make sure that there is a lot of advocacy done towards young generation to understand the importance of IP right. And what do you think we could do there?
So, as representative of the regulator, I'll start from the regulatory perspective, of course. Even though Magnus was quite explicit in terms of some of the measures we've already that are already in place to stimulate or to protect. So when we're speaking about the EU and when we speak about, for instance, trademarks or industrial designs, there are a lot of rules and directives that are in place and already transposed into by all the member states legislations. However, there is one major issue when we speak about the EU legislation on that side, and this is on a project and a file that has been planned in 2012, but it's still put on hold. And here we're speaking about the so-called unitary patent package. What it is actually a patent package that would guarantee that the patents and the intellectual property is protected on the whole territory of the EU. This project is still not finalized and that legislation is still not in place. And this creates a lot of burdens and difficulties for inventions and inventors in Europe. Because, for instance, if you have a very good idea or product, to protect it, you have to do it territory by territory in each one of the member states. So at this point, the competitiveness is very difficult to manage, because if you're a young entrepreneur who's created something amazing, for instance, let's say in France, and he's had patented his idea there, and for example, in the few neighboring countries, he's not protected anyhow, that someone wouldn't steal and wouldn't implement that idea in Italy, for instance. So I think taking it as something we should be working more and thinking about further, because that's going to be crucial step and quite important step for Europe in order to protect our inventors and to be able to create that competitiveness of the EU on an EU basis, would be to put in place that package that would guarantee patent protection on the territory of the EU. So I hope us and the Commission would start moving faster into that perspective, because I think this more or less answers your question to a certain extent in terms of how to motivate young people to be working in that direction. Because at least if you grant them that, you're opening them a massive market. Like, you're not speaking about one country, but you're actually offering them the advantage of the whole European Union market. And just a brief point on something which the EU has already done when we're speaking about young entrepreneurs. There are a lot of schemes that are helping to decrease, for instance, the administrative fees to put something in place or to put something in the market. Also, something we shouldn't be ignoring is like there are a lot of tools to get pro bono legal advice. And I don't think we're speaking quite a lot about this, especially in a situation that I've described you just now, when we haven't offered yet the full patent protection. Having legal services available and knowing where to find them and actually using them is also crucial to support and to protect young entrepreneurs in that field.
Totally, thank you. No, and I like you mentioned, something that it's looking at urbanization, because it's something we hear several times, and make sure that we're getting there. I'm sure, because it's something that I think we had a bit of an acceleration in the topic mentioned in Europe on several dossiers, so hopefully also comes in that one. Among the other things that, Tsvetelina, you have been a strong advocate, it's definitely the creation of a EU innovation area. And you mentioned this in in several interventions. Do you think it could be better support the ambition of today inventors, as you mentioned several times, also entrepreneurs? What would be the key action somehow to look at the EU innovation area and make sure that it's actually happening and helping young innovators for the challenges of tomorrow?
I think there would be three main aspects here. I'll be very brief because I think it's very clear what we should do. First of all, we've already mentioned connect talent and knowledge. So basically connect the education system and the needs of the companies working with those technologies. So first, connecting talent and knowledge. Second, creating that area properly in terms to grant a constant connection among the member states. And here we're speaking about proper connection between the SMEs and startups, for instance, because you would agree with me, like if we create that proper environment in one member state, whichever name we take, if you want Poland, because you said they're one of the outliers in terms of the good examples in the beginning, they would not be able to compete with anything that's coming from the US or China, for instance. It's just the scale is different. So first, connecting knowledge and talent. Second, proper connection between the member states in terms of SMEs, startups, and like the whole high-tech industry. And third is harmonize the finance mechanisms across Europe, especially for new startup, for small and medium enterprises, for even for single entrepreneurs who have like a great idea that they just need to finance or to get the proper relationship or connections to be able to put that in place. Because so far we have financing schemes just like on parts, certain industries or like certain countries, but we don't have a proper financing mechanism, which unfortunately I have to give the example again with the US in terms of how they support financially their entrepreneurs. And we should be working more on that in Europe.
Absolutely. No, completely agree. And traveling a bit around, I think you're spot on with all the three of them. In your first one, you mentioned this link again, which I think it's something it took a lot of time for people to realize, but I think now, at least on Brussels level, it's there, this link from education and companies, learning and make sure the two talk to each other. It's something that really, if I look back 15 years ago, it was very few people mentioning and many against. And now, it's something where it's a wave, and it builds up and it's definitely there. Magnus, if you look at of this conversation, there is the side of Ericsson, which clearly continues to bring new opportunities for learning and accelerating innovation. And if you were to, some of the people looking at this webinar are clearly young people, and if you were to give them more details on what somehow the initiative that Ericsson is currently involved in that front, what would you say to make them more curious, interested, and definitely understand that whenever they're even in their teenage years or early 20s, still in their school, in their university, they definitely have themselves to also go and look what companies are doing and offering.
Yeah, we have a little bit of different initiatives, and we are trying to walk the walk here. But the first thing I must mention is now in the pandemic, we really saw the importance of this infrastructure, right? Countries that had a well-established broadband connectivity, including then the mobile broadband connectivity, they were able then to continue the education and everything, despite that you had to close down the schools. And it was extremely unfortunate then if you need to close the schools, and even worse, of course, if you then can't continue in the remote. So I think they really proved the importance of this technology, right? So that I think looking at in a larger picture, that is our major contribution here. But then, of course, we do programs now trying to do that worldwide. So we have this initiative Connect to Learn, where we are trying then to provide connectivity to schools. So where the school in itself don't have any connectivity, and providing connectivity to the school in order to facilitate education. So there we are doing programs together with UNICEF in order to provide that connectivity for schools. So that's one example. And then of course, I think when a lot of this innovation will happen on top of this infrastructure. So again, I think to provide the possibility to have things connected and provide the capabilities of education and then possibilities to experiment. As I think the young inventors, they will figure out what to do with this. But that's nothing we should do for them. They will figure out. They will invent. They will drive this. So it's a lot of providing the possibilities, I think, the enablers, and that we should do. And this is a combination of industry and governments and EU as a whole, I think.
Thank you. And I like the fact that you mentioned connectivity several times. I mean, there's been a long debate on, the future is not going to be anymore, the rich and poor, or, third world, etc. It's really the one who have access and the one who don't, because then access gives the opportunity, and access is connectivity. So definitely an extremely important program. Tsvetelina, I go back a second to what you mentioned before, now the 3-point view innovation area, and your third one was the money. Clearly having a look at, a very practical thing at the end, put your money where your mouth is, I like to say, on the other side of the ocean. And it seems that with the new post-COVID-19 plan, Europe is at least discussing or planning to put a considerable budget. I mean, we're talking about 100 billion euros to foster advances of technology, for innovation, tackle pressing in challenges, and definitely, this is quite a considerable amount of money. If we look back 3 years ago, approving 1 or 2 billion more looked challenging, and now suddenly there is 100 times more on the table. But then we have to make sure, that this money, at least from the policy side that are finally out, are placed in the right position. What policy will the EU pursue to encourage innovation, and what do you think that you should pursue to encourage innovation and ensure the funding is really placed in the most effective position and places?
So you've mentioned one of the very specific numbers in terms of like the Horizon Europe program that is specifically devoted, and it's true that its budget has been significantly increased. But that's not everything we're doing, and that's not all of it. So if we look at the Next Generation EU, or like that common EU debt that had been issued to support the COVID crisis, and if we read it carefully, we'll see that there is an unprecedented big amount of money that would be available for each one of the member states. Here we're speaking in total about more than 750 billion euros that are going to be distributed and already are distributed among the member states. One of the requirements for a member state to receive their portion of that Next Generation EU fund is to submit a national plan, which includes specific reforms and specific projects that would be implemented with that specific amount of money. So far, so good. One of the requirements is like that 20% of that money should go in innovation, digitalization, and technological development. So basically, if you put a line and calculate over the whole amount that would be available for the European economy, we've set a target that at least 20% should be dedicated to projects like that, which is already a pretty significant matter. If you don't fulfill that requirement as a member state, you're just not going to get access to the amount of money. So by submitting the plan, you should already have the projects in that field that you're going to be realizing in the next few years in order to get access to the funding. So that's one of the ways we try to stimulate, first of all, the economic development in the digital and technological field, and also help the recovery from COVID-19. Another aspect, last one, which I'm going to mention, is also when we look at the long-term budget of the European Union, the 7 years long-term budget, there we have a similar requirement that about 20% of it should be dedicated to the innovation sector. So on top of the specific programs which are created and dedicated only for that, as Horizon Europe, overall availability of money flowing in the EU, about 1/5 should be going into technological development, digitalization, innovation, which I think is a pretty significant amount. And having seen the trend, it's probably, this is the minimum. And I think this is going to be increasing in the next 10 years for sure.
Thanks. And that's also a nice thing to hear, that it's going to be, there's potentially going to be more on the innovation side. I think it's really important that, the message goes out. I mean, the money, definitely, that's how you speak, but also that the message goes out, And we're getting towards the end. We are 1 minute late. So the very last question, Magnus, as an industry representative, could you give some examples of how Ericsson is working with, young entrepreneurs? Let's go back to, you mentioned Spotify, and Tsvetelina several times mentioned startups. I mean, there are many interesting cases in Europe, and unicorns are there. Stockholm is definitely one of these places, if not the most interesting to look at the moment. Which are the things that you guys are working at Ericsson? Can you give us some, sneak peek on some secrets that you guys are working on?
I think we, together with our customers, the telecommunication operators offering the services, we are together, of course, very interesting to get new innovation on top of this platform, because that will generate traffic and it will generate sort of income for our customers, etc. So we are driving something we're calling the 5G startup program, where we are engaging with startups, and then they can do sort of a minimum valuable product service and try that with some operator. And then we help them to be visible to other operators, right? So they can we can help them to scale and to really make sure that if they do one successful thing over here, that could then be introduced in another market, and that could accelerate their growth. And we do this in our own interest, in our customers' interest, but that's of course what is needed in order to create the new international big companies that are able to scale fast and grow, and we would like to help with that. So that's one very, very specific thing we are doing in order to create this. Then, of course, we are working with universities and on the 6G programs, where we are looking into what will come after 5G, right? So we have already started research and innovation around that. And there we are, of course, all working with the top universities in Europe, and there is a lot of interesting things going on. And again, we are seeing these investments now in Europe. So there is a lot of fund to be applied for, both on an EU level, but also from each and every of the member states. So there is a lot of possibilities now, and we'll see a lot of interesting things start. So there's been a lot of opportunities in the universities to do research in this field.
Thank you. And we are getting to the close of this, and definitely not the last one. As you know, we have done several webinars on the importance of inventors, so we're going to have more webinars coming in the near future. You can follow all this on the website HiddenInventors.eu, and obviously on all our social media where you're watching this interesting conversation. I personally would like to thank both speakers, because it's never easy to get together and be so straightforward and mention plans and how you guys see things, and it was extremely interesting to watch and work with you and your team. And I know that's not going to be the last time we're going to have more things doing together. So I see Tsvetelina smiling. That's definitely a good sign. We have many things in the pipeline for this 2022. And thank you everyone for watching. Thanks to the Think Young team who helped me to put this together and manage to build this. Thanks to obviously Ericsson for supporting us. And stay tuned. The research is up on the website, so you can go, and if you have no plans for this weekend, probably that's a nice read on how creativity is, the status and the level of creativity around young people in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.